Hello and welcome to Beat Point, the one-off special giving yourselves an insight into the production side of factual television. I'm Colette Carr and I'm joined by Julie Grant of Firecrest Productions. Thanks for coming, Julie. But first, here's what's coming up on today's show. We speak to Agnes Wilkie about the beginnings of factual formats.
In the 30 odd years that I've worked in television, I can tell you at every point people have talked about the good old days. They were always the good old days.
Denis Mooney talks to us in all matters economic.
If you ask a documentary maker, the game shows put a squeeze on me, he or she will always say, absolutely they do, make more documentaries rather than game shows.
And lastly, Paul Murray gives us his insight into the future of factual television.
Sort of said I thought it was a bit like under 12s football, you know, the ball goes there and everyone chases the ball and then the ball goes over there and everyone chases the ball. You know, TV's a bit like that, you know, if talent contests are hot then everyone wants a talent contest.
I'll be speaking to Julie a little later, but first, our reporter Grant Maxwell has been speaking to Agnes Wilkie, who was formerly head of features at STV, about what it was like when she started out and how it's changed today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure now to welcome Agnes Wilkie to Beat Point. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
I'll start by asking, what was it like to make Scottish television 20 years ago?
It was absolutely brilliant. In 1995, which is just over 20 years ago, 5 of the programmes that I was responsible for won BAFTAs at the Scottish BAFTAs. That was unprecedented and it was amazing, and that included Scottish Men, that was made for under 20k a show, beating Billy Connolly's World Tour of Australia to the factual BAFTA. It probably cost at least 20 times what our programme did.
Would you say producers need to be a little bit more clever, you know, to cause, like with budgets going lower?
I don't think that they need to be any cleverer than they've always had to be. I've never met a producer or director who thinks that their budget's big enough. And I'm talking Planet Earth to Glasgow TV, it doesn't matter, it's never enough. I think what any clever producer has always had to do, and I'm imagining still has to do today, is look at what is my budget, what is the best show I can make for that money, and then cut their cloth accordingly. When we started, it seemed to me you were allowed to fail. It was like if it was sounded like a really good idea and you set it up all the right way, if it didn't actually become the standout success, then you weren't sacked for it. You didn't have to worry too much about it. Look at America, they make tons of television and tons of it is absolute rubbish, but it's also the best television in the world, much of it as well. So I just think that's the nature of the creative business that it is that there is no such thing as a surefire winner, and yeah, you have to make a lot of bad stuff to get to the good stuff.
So in what ways, in terms of crew and job titles, would you say that the industry's changed kind of from when you started out to the present?
Yes, I think there have been new and different roles. When I was working, we were beginning to use self-shooters and it just started now. That seems to be pretty kind of industry standard all over the place, and I think that puts a lot of pressure on one person. And that must be very hard to deal with on a daily basis. I also noticed that there seemed to be a lot more exec levels around, and that must be very frustrating for the workers. And yes, I also noticed the rise of the edit producer.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that they've been good or bad for the industry?
So this is my hobby horse. I understand why the role has been created. I think it's a practical, pragmatic solution to overshooting. I totally understand that and indeed have employed the odd edit producer in my time, but I do think what you see on the screen is overly formulaic, overly formatted and overly predictable television. I think you need to be the person who is out on the road shooting this stuff is the person who will have the passion and the creativity and the imagination and the desire to make the very best film they can out of it, and they're the only person in a position to deal with the unexpected and perhaps catalyse that and change the direction to suit it. I think making a film, whether it's a 2-minute film for news or a 90-minute feature film, it is like having a baby, and you love your babies, even the ugly ones, but only you will love them that way. So to expect someone else, no matter what a brilliant edit producer they are, to come in and feel the same as you do about that film, I think is asking too much. So I think what you get is sticking to the format, making sure we've got all the right boxes ticked, and that makes for, I think, quite dull, predictable television, and I think that's what we see a lot more. I think we would have more heart and soul in television if the person whose pride and joy it was allowed to sit in on the edit and put in their full tuppence worth.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being on Beat Point, Agnes, and back to the studio.
Thank you.
We'd have a lot more heart and soul in television if the person whose pride and joy it was allowed to sit in and edit and put in their full tuppence worth. I can understand where Agnes is coming from in terms of the edit producer. What's your take on the role?
I have had to work with edit producers quite a lot due to the sort of delivery deadlines of programmes, and also because of budget. You're trying to concertina down, so while filming's still taking place, we end up with the edit happening. I agree with her in some instances. I think in when you have somebody who's passionate about the programme they're making, if they were to go into the edit, they apply that passion all the way through, where somebody else might not quite feel as engaged with the subject matter as in the edit producer. However, well, I suppose also that sometimes a director might not might have ideas in his head about how a programme would cut together, might have shot specific things that he or she has envisages taking into the edit, and sometimes that gets lost once somebody goes into the edit and they have the pressures of the edit, and so yeah, sometimes it can have an impact, I think, on the creative outcome of the programme. In other instances, like you get that sort of phrase of, Agnes was talking about, you love your babies. I've heard editors before saying it's time to kill your babies, because basically you have this great vision of what you want to take in, and you get rid of it. Sometimes edit producers, given your timescale, will just cut through that. So they don't come with the emotional baggage or the passion for a shot or the passion for sort of certain areas of the subject matter. They'll just go, do you know what, it's not working out, and they cut through. So for me as a programme maker in charge of a budget or trying to ensure the edit's the very expensive part of it. So if they can manage to cut through something faster, then they'll deliver it on budget more likely. But that said, I do agree with Agnes in terms of the passion that carries through. I think they don't sit, and I think maybe an edit producer sometimes doesn't sit and watch the footage and pick the absolute best moments, because they've not gone out. Quite a lot of the time that a lot of people might not have a directing experience, so they've not gone out and sort of had those moments where you're looking for the brilliant moments. They'll kind of cut through it quite fast and assemble it and kick it, so get it out the other end. So yeah, I pros and cons to it, I think, and it depends on the project. So when you're looking at formatted shows, sometimes you just need to get through them. So there is a kind of means to an end, but yes, sometimes you lose that passion.
Oh, wonderful. Well, it's back over to our reporter Grant, who's now speaking to Denis Mooney, formerly Head of Sport and Religion at STV, about the balance channels need to find when it comes to budgeting.
Thank you. It's a pleasure now to welcome Denis Mooney to Beat Point. Thanks for joining us.
Great pleasure.
I'll start by asking, economically, how important is it to have a successful show to a channel?
I think economically, for a commercial channel, it's everything. Having shows that can play at peak points in the schedule and that can play over and over and over and over again is massively important. Clearly, it's a different thing for a non-commercial channel, a PSB like the BBC, but commercially, it's hugely important.
Would you say that kind of factual formats and game shows kind of put a squeeze on the amount of documentaries and sort of high quality television that a channel can put out? I
think historically people would say that's true, but I think also that there's something slightly misleading about that train of thought, in that if you go back over time, channels that have been successful have always played a mixture of material. Now, if you ask a documentary maker, the game shows put a squeeze on me, he or she will always say, absolutely they do, make more documentaries rather than game shows. But if you ask folk that make game shows, they'll say, well, we deliver big numbers, we do it relatively cheaply, and therefore we should always be prioritised. I think there's a constant fight inside television for the things that people like and are interested in. And I think a lot of the time it's actually quite a healthy tension.
Do you think trying to find that balance between what people like and what's successful can be difficult for channel makers?
I think it can. I think there's a variance between public service channels and straightforwardly commercial channels, where the commercial channels in a sense have got less pressure on them. There's no regulatory pressure. There's almost no pressure of any kind to do anything that might be regarded as a bit worthy or maybe more worthy than something else. So I think there will always be a tension. Again though, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that there's such a tension, because the audience demands more than one type of thing. They don't just want one genre of programming.
Economically, how important is it to a creator that has a successful show?
Well, I think if you want to get asked back, you want to be successful. I put bluntly, if you consistently churn out shows that are not successful in any sense, and that can be reputational as well as numerically, like getting big numbers is critically important for something like a game show or a big light entertainment show. If you don't get numbers, you'll get ditched. For documentary makers, if you churn out stuff that ends up being inaccurate or flawed in some other editorial sense, you'll get ditched. For any programme content creator, it's to do the very best in whatever field it is that you're working.
Do you think that channels have got the balance right between getting those game shows and more documentaries?
I think it depends which channel you look at, for example. I watch huge amounts of television, some of which my wife assures me is crap, but I like it. So I watch loads of stuff. I watch reruns of game shows, because I actually think that if you haven't seen it before and it's a well-made game show, there's tension in it and it can be quite entertaining, and it can be a bit surprising. Similarly, I watch PBS and I watch loads of documentary output on the likes of Channel 4 or the BBC, some of which might be described as a bit worthy, but I think that the nature of documentary also has changed. And I think that what channels now describe as documentary, maybe 20 years ago, either hadn't been invented or it would have been called something else. And I think the blurring of those lines isn't a bad thing.
Wonderful. Well, I'd like to thank you for joining us on Beatpoint.
Pleasure.
No worries.
Thank you.
Back to the studio.
I think the nature of documentary also has changed. I think what channels now describe as documentary, maybe 20 years ago either hadn't been invented or would have been called something else. And I think the blurring of those lines isn't a bad thing. Denis seems quite happy with the change of documentaries having beat points. Is that something that you found in your career?
Yeah, I think I agree with Denis actually. I kind of welcome that, because I think as a programme maker it allows you to pull in ideas from different genres, which help the creative process, I think, and it helps you deliver maybe more exciting programmes. So I think it's something that programme makers are doing increasingly, is looking at those sort of little tricks from different genres and applying them to documentary making. So yeah, I welcome it in the way that Denis does actually.
So you yourself are working now on a programme called Super Shoppers. Does that all fall into place there? Does that relate to this new project as well?
Yeah, I think, Super Shoppers, you would say, would be, if you looked at it, I think you might think it was a features programme, or might come out of the features department of Channel 4, when actually it comes out of current affairs department. So current affairs, when this was put together, there was a initially it started out as a pilot, and that pilot and that kind of early development of the idea was put towards, they were looking at how do we make current affairs more fun? How do we bring it to a larger audience? So they did that by applying a features sort of, I suppose, kind of atmosphere to it, and style to it. So they look to stylise it and so that and make it kind of funny and entertaining. So you end up kind of bringing in like the kind of visual elements that you might not always apply to certain documentaries, a very features-looking kind of style that's applied to current affairs programming. And sometimes I think that belittles maybe the kind of journalism in it. There's a high level of journalism in it. And a high level of work that goes on to it, but by the time it makes it onto screen, it's an entertaining insight into tips and how to shop better, so on. So, because the kind of crossing of departments, I think, is increasing, and that goes that sort of so across documentaries pulling on different elements and different styles, current affairs pulling on different styles. You go to features and they might pull on current affairs styles. It's increasing across all departments.
Well, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. Well, for the last time, it's back over to Grant. This time he's speaking to Paul Murray, former head of formats at IWC and creator of Location, 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 about formatted programming today and where their future lies.
Thank you. It is a pleasure now to welcome Paul Murray to Beatpoint. Paul Murray, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure, nice to be here.
Nice to be here. I've been doing a lot of research. It's been done on the impact shows have had once they've went abroad.
Yeah.
Would you see that's a good thing or a bad thing, having this same show that's just repeated over and over again with maybe the odd slight culturally different?
I mean, it's the holy grail of television. It's what everyone wants to do, is create a format that is sold in 25, 30 countries. The reason a show goes around the world is because it's probably an entertaining and good show. Bad shows don't work around the world. And I think the thing is that each country will have slightly different broadcasting rules. So sometimes you can't do things in different countries. So for example, you can't give away cash prizes in China. You're just not allowed to do it. They don't do voting in China either. So some of the bigger shows that we would have in Britain and America, that they literally won't translate. If you imported a format from elsewhere, you would adapt it to make sure it was the best show for the British audience, and vice versa. I think you'd be mad not to let people adapt the shows for their own territories, because they should know what their audience is like. I mean, there's lots of shows that are still going, that have been going for 30 years.
I suppose talent shows, they'll never
they'll come and go, and some people get bored of them because they've seen them too much. And TV, I think, can often be quite a copycat industry. I always sort of said I thought it was a bit like under 12s football. The ball goes there and everyone chases the ball, and then the ball goes over there and everyone chases the ball. TV's a bit like that. If talent contests are hot, then everyone wants a talent contest. If quizzes are hot, everyone wants a quiz. If knockout competitions are, I think they just constantly evolve. And I suppose there's lots of different things that are kind of niggling away at telly. So I think there's so many more channels now that I don't necessarily think of people watching less content. They're just watching it in more places. So over the piece, everyone's going to lose a little bit, but I would have thought the same amount of people are watching television content, or just on different devices. And
would you say, just with the amount of channels that are coming out, you would say that there is a kind of, has there been a dip in sort of quality versus quantity?
I think this is a golden era of television. I really genuinely think the drama is amazing. I think some of the comedy is incredibly sophisticated. The big game shows can be incredibly clever. That there's access docs that give you insight to places that are wrestling with really complicated issues in a modern world. And so I don't buy this, that TV's dumbing down. I think the opposite has happened. I think it's got cleverer and cleverer and cleverer, because I think the audience has got
so diverse that everyone just got a little.
And I think also the audience is immensely articulate now. about how television works and how storylines develop and characters, and I think you've got to try incredibly hard now to get a show to connect with the audience, and I genuinely think that television's at a real high point. I mean, there's always going to be, you know, good shows and bad shows, and there's going to be shows that repeat and they might lose a key creative or writer and it might not be quite the same, and those things are going to happen, you know. It's tough to make a show. It's really tough to make a really good show. So know your industry, I guess.
Yeah, well, I'd like to thank you very much, Paul, for joining us on Beat Point.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
And back to the studio.
So the audience is immensely articulate now about how television works, how storyline develops and characters. So I think you've got to try incredibly hard to now get a show to connect with an audience. Even going back to what Agnes was saying, you can't just throw a show together anymore. How crucial are those early development stages now?
They're extremely important. I think shows, taking a show from the kind of pitch stage to the actual initial stages of production, there's a lot to work out, and I think probably early on in my career we would just kind of career into making the programme as we all sort of thought. More recently I've learned that kind of early stage and the communication with commissioner, with your exec, with a channel controller, and with schedulers even, in terms of what they're looking for from that programme, what they're expecting out of that programme, and actually nailing down the detail of what you're about to deliver. And ensuring that all the elements for the production are placed and that you can deliver it within the budget that you've been given. I have had incidents where we've been sitting in an edit and we've gone through filming and have realised that a commissioner's take on what we were delivering and our take on what we're delivering have been quite different. So then you have that horrific feeling of, oh my God, we're not going to deliver to the channel. But you start to have to quickly work out how do we deliver what they're looking for. And sometimes the commissioners aren't right either. Sometimes the commissioner and their expectation of what their channel controller wants are off. And you find that you are in line with the channel controller, and so you can find yourself swinging back and forward, but you don't want to be getting to that stage because at that point you're in an edit, everything becomes really expensive. So nailing that, also trying to get all those ideas and actually really nail what the channel's wanting and what everybody is putting into it, and trying to get that sort of show that will, I don't know, like cut through on the channel. Everybody wants a successful show. Everybody wants the viewers, and you know that if your show's not being received well by a scheduler or a channel controller, then it won't end up on air in the slot that you've been promised. So you never, thankfully I've never got to that stage, but you don't want to be getting at that stage. You want an audience to come to the show. You want it to be a massive success. Everybody wants their shows to be winning awards and bringing in an audience and hitting the newspaper headlines, and potentially selling internationally, if it's a format, so yeah, that initial stage I think is really crucial. Often when programmes are developed, the people developing the ideas don't necessarily think out how exactly that might come to fruition, how you might make the programme, and there's a big leap there, and that's the point at which I've learned it can all go quite wrong if you don't nail it at that stage. So, and I think now the pressures on budgets, that channels are investing in you as a company. So I mean, I'm freelance, so I go into work for a company. My reputation's at stake, the company's reputation's at stake. Everybody has a really kind of vested interest. So yeah, the initial stages, I think, in those developments are increasingly so because the pressures are higher on making sure that the money that a channel has invested in you is spent well and delivers well.
Well, Paul commented saying that he thinks television is a lot smarter now. Where do you think television is heading?
I think probably those pressures on programme makers to deliver big hitters, it is just increasing. The idea of delivering something that is formulaic or a copycat of an old programme is no longer acceptable. So when Paul says things like he thinks they're smarter, cleverer programmes, I don't know. I think over the years of me working, I think we've ended up, each stage you're looking for something to apply to a programme. Majority of programmes have been made, so yeah, I think that's where he means smarter, clever. You're looking for different ways of introducing different genres or different ideas to things, or just shooting things that have been done in one way with a new aspect. So we've just had the kind of fixed rig phase there, and it's like, is it the end of fixed rig? But then somebody will find a different way to apply that. So I think programme makers are constantly having to think of clever ideas, because yes, the viewer is smart and the viewer's seen a lot of permutations of the same subject matters, but how can you do things in a different manner, or how can you get access? The viewer's never going to get tired of, say like with documentaries, tired of learning about people's lives, or learning about animals' lives, or new technologies. But it's how do we film those new technologies? Can we bring new technologies to that? So I think television is moving with so many channels and so many ways of viewing. I think television's moving to our television producers are constantly having to reinvent themselves and reinvent ideas and find that clever sort of nuances that they can apply to programmes. So I think it's just moving into a more challenging era. Maybe that's where it's moving to.
Well, I know we were talking before about it's almost as if TV companies and TV producers need to make sure they're not falling into almost a copycat culture.
Yep.
Such.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is with so many channels, you're just constantly trying to strive to do something in a new and unique way. For me personally, I also try to strive to apply high production values, and I know Agnes talked about the self shooter and the continued use of the self shooter. I continually strive to find projects where I don't always have to use self shooters, because I want to try to constantly strive to get high production values in what I make, and I think the viewer now knows that as well. Yeah. So there are certain times when the self shooter is brilliant, and there are some brilliant self shooters. There are a lot of pressures on them. I've done a lot of filming with people, sent them out on their own, and they're in quite difficult situations where they have to do everything themselves, and I recognise those stresses on them. But then I can also see it coming onto screen. So for me, trying to get projects where you can apply high production values, I think that also helps. But helps the viewer tune into your programme. Something in their head is saying they like that. They like that production value. But that's never going to happen to everything. So there isn't the money now to be able to do that. So yeah, the kind of impact on everybody is to ensure that you're all putting ideas and pulling together your ideas to try and create something unique or new or attention grabbing, on screen.
Well, brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jill. And for you, for watching at home, this has been Beat Point, and thanks for watching. Goodbye.